All right, welcome back, guys. So now we're in this video we're going to talk now about two things that I call subconscious action and subconscious instinct, right? Or action and instinct. So we're basically going to now talk more about the nature of subconscious thought, right? Which is different from thoughts from your conscious mind, right? And we've mostly been talking about subconscious thought in terms of transcendental mental functions, right? But we're going to talk about it a little bit more generally, right, in this video. So basically, when we talked about the conscious mind, so the conscious mind, we said every thought produced by the conscious mind is basically a command, right? So it's your conscious mind thoughts or your intentions, they express a command that's coming from the conscious mind. Now, the subconscious mind, an interesting question to ask, because if its thoughts are different, then what does the subconscious express, right? So we know that the subconscious thought expresses itself as an emotion, or it can express itself as a belief. It can express itself as a form of perception, something that the conscious mind perceives, right? So when you imagine an apple in your mind, that's a form of altered perception, or the subconscious altering the perception of the conscious mind. It can express itself as I don't know if I said already, a belief, which is which is still a form of altered perception. It can express itself as a form of controlling your body, or as a form of creativity, which is, we haven't gone into too much about the more pure definition of transcendental creativity, but essentially transcendental creativity is the subconscious ability to compel the mind or alter your perception in such a way that tells you how to put things into arrangement patterns that fit subconscious forms, right? We'll talk more about that in chapter 13. We're talking more about the instances of subconscious expression, right? But what is subconscious expression really? If we can sum up everything the conscious mind does, the way the conscious mind expresses itself by just using the term command, what would be the more summing term that we could use for the subconscious? Well, I like to think of the subconscious as expressing action, right? So each one of those things I said, they're all actions, right? They're not commands, they're an action that's related to the command from the conscious mind. So to go over this first point, intention expresses command, while subconscious thought expresses action. So in a sense, the subconscious executes the conscious mind's command. So the subconscious is the executor, right? So the conscious mind is like the general, right? So it gives a command, and the subconscious mind is the part of you whose responsibility it is to carry out the command, right? So it executes the command. So every thought expressed by the subconscious mind is actually an action, right? So when I feel an emotion, my subconscious thought expresses itself as a feeling or has an emotion. So that's an action, right? When I imagine something in my mind, let's say I want to imagine an apple, right? The image, the part of my mind that is responsible for actually bringing an image to my mind so my conscious mind can see it is my subconscious mind. So it expresses the action of an image or the action of an altered perception and so on. So every subconscious thought expresses itself as an action. And so you just use the term here, subconscious action. So I don't use that, actually, this is the proper term, but I don't use it that much later in the book. But for now, subconscious action refers to the particular expression of subconscious thought at some particular moment. So that's just a term I use, referring to, in the same way the conscious mind expresses intention, right? The subconscious expresses subconscious action. So intention is what every thought that comes from the subconscious mind is. But subconscious action is basically refers to every thought from the subconscious mind, right? So if I feel an emotion, that's a type of subconscious action, right? If I'm creating, using my positive mind, that's a type of subconscious action, right? So the subconscious mind expresses action. Now to go over this next point, what's important to understand about all of this, right, is that thinking with the subconscious is still different than thinking with the conscious mind, right? And this is where I start to talk about instinct. So thinking with the subconscious occurs on the level of awareness that's colloquially referred to as instinct, right? So this is very important in terms of learning how to control your subconscious. Now, before I get into this, I want to now talk about a little bit more about the ground state, subconscious action in terms of the ground state and its excited state. So when your subconscious is in its ground state, right? So the brain is primarily giving it commands, right? It is technically still performing a subconscious action. So it still expresses thoughts in the form of actions, right? So if I imagine an apple in my mind, right, using my negative mind, so I can do it anytime I want, as much as I want, and imagining anything I want to, with no component of time or charging or any of that, right? My subconscious is still responsible for doing that. So if I imagine an apple in my mind and I do it instantaneously, right, my subconscious is still carrying out the command of my intention. It's just, it's controlled now is primarily coming from my body, right? So it's a very seamless, easy process. If my brain is working properly, it's supposed to be a seamless and easy process in that state. However, when you hold an intention, right? So when you hold an intention for 7 to 10 seconds, it exerts a pressure on your subconscious, and then it launches it like into the air in a sense, right? So eventually it'll go to its excited state after 7 to 10 seconds, and it'll stay in the excited state for a few seconds, which is we talked about last video. But when it's in its excited state, right, now your subconscious actions are a little different, or they'll feel different, right? So in this case, a subconscious action is going to express itself in a way that refers to what we've been calling transcendental mental abilities, right? So it's going to express itself as emotion or transcendental imagination, right? So when it's in its ground state, subconscious action will express itself as normal imagination, right? Which follows all the properties of a negative mind. When it's in its transcendental, when the subconscious is in its excited state, or your mind is in a transcendental state of awareness, then subconscious action will express itself as a transcendental mental ability. So you'll be able to use transcendental imagination. When it's in its ground state, you can use normal creativity, right? Which is not very impressive. When you hold intention for 7 to 10 seconds and it enters its excited, your subconscious enters an excited state, then you'll be able to express creativity as transcendental creativity, right? So subconscious action will, its expression or the nature of its expression changes when it's in a ground state versus when it's in an excited state. So we're mainly going to be talking about subconscious action when the subconscious is in its excited state, because that's the one we're interested in, that's the one we care about. Subconscious action in its ground state is just everything that we've been referring to as the negative mind or normal mental abilities. So going forward, when I use the term subconscious action, what I'm really referring to is subconscious action when the subconscious is in its excited state, and your conscious mind is in a transcendental state of awareness, not a ground state or normal state of awareness. And that's another way of saying subconscious action refers to thoughts expressed by the positive mind. Because when I use the term positive mind, I'm referring to your subconscious when it's in its excited state. Now, going over this next point, so now I want to talk about instinct, but I want to go over this next point. So subconscious instinct has a very just do it feel to it, particularly when in a transcendental state. So that's really important. So what I want to talk about now is what it's like to actually think with your subconscious mind. So when you remember what I said before, so when you enter a transcendental state of awareness, the syncopations between your intention and the response from your subconscious mind changes, right? So your subconscious doesn't respond as instantaneously as it does when it's in its ground state. It responds that instantaneously because of what your brain is doing. But when it's in its excited state, it doesn't respond as instantaneously. Now, what's very interesting and important to note about this is that when you do enter a transcendental state of awareness, so when you hold the intention for 7 to 10 seconds and you find yourself entering a transcendental state, or like a daydream or a dream state for a few seconds, you're going to notice that it's going to start to become more clear to you that you're actually thinking with two minds, right? So you're used to thinking with the conscious mind. You're used to doing everything with the conscious mind and just thinking solely in those terms. Again, the brain is the one that sort of creates the illusion that you don't have two minds, because the conscious mind and the subconscious think practically as one when they're in the ground state. And that only occurs because of what your brain is doing. I think the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere really help to sort of bridge them together and make them act as one. But when you enter an excited state, that goes away. So you're gonna, when you enter a transcendental state of awareness, you're actually gonna notice that you're using two minds to think. Your conscious mind is doing one thing, but all the action, right? So what you're imagining, what you're daydreaming, what you're feeling in your dream, the compulsions, the urges, you're actually thinking with your subconscious, right? You're gonna notice that there's just a difference, right? And it may be something you've never noticed before, but it is different. Now, thinking, and this is probably the trickiest thing to explain about the controlling the subconscious part, because, I can't go in your mind and kind of show you, okay, do this. No, that's the subconscious. This is your conscious thought. You know what I mean? You just have to keep practicing it and get used to it. But I can describe to you what it's like to think with your subconscious mind. So thinking with the subconscious mind occurs on the level, exactly like it says here, on a level of awareness that we generally or colloquially refer to as instinct. So instinct is, the term instinct in this context basically means that you kind of just do it, which is what I say here. So for example, when you produce an emotion, right? So think of any time in your life, there's probably been hundreds of thousands, if not millions of them, right? You've had moments where you just experience an emotion, right? You didn't think about it on a conscious level. You didn't think about it in a premeditated way. Now, when you do things consciously, you always think about it in a premeditated way, in a way that's based on planning, in free will, and things like that. It doesn't just happen automatically or by force. You've chosen it. But instinct isn't like that, right? When you're on the level of instinct, you just do it, right? You just do it, and there's no sense of planning or premeditation or thinking about the future or thinking about the outcome. None of that happens. You just do it in the moment instantaneously or instinctively, right? So for example, when you produce an emotion, you just did it, right? If you think about the last time you felt a strong emotion, you didn't think to yourself consciously, well, if I do this and if I do that and if I, carry the one, right, then magically I'll finally feel the emotion. You didn't have to do any of that. You were in some situation, then just in the heat of the moment, boom, you just did it, right? You just produced emotion. Now, if you try to produce emotion consciously, not using the techniques we've talked about in terms of holding your attention, things like that, but let's just say you try to produce an emotion with your conscious mind. So you just force it through your will, your free will, the same way you think of anything with your free will. You'll notice it doesn't work, right? There's nothing you can do to just forcefully feel an emotion using your intention in that way. But under certain conditions, right, when you can feel an emotion, you just do it, right? You don't think about it, you just did it, right? And that's when you did it in that way, or you just did it, what actually was happening is you're thinking with your instinct or your subconscious instinct. So the subconscious mind, and what I said before too, when you hold an intention, right, and you enter a transcendental state of awareness, what your subconscious is allowed to think is going to be based on the intention that you held. However, it's still going to have even a little bit of freedom after that, after it's quantized. That little bit of freedom represents the little bit of freedom that the subconscious mind has to think. And what that's really referring to is your subconscious instinct, right? So your subconscious is going to instinctively just think of, it's going to be somewhat random, but it is still going to be related to the intention that you held. But after that, it's just free to think what it wants to. So you never really even know, you're never really even sure what your subconscious instinct is going to choose to think, right? And you notice that when you daydream and when you have regular dreams and things like that, your subconscious instinct kind of does its own thing. However, your conscious mind does have enough control to confine the area in which it chooses to think. However, once it's in that area, it still has a little bit of freedom to do its own thing, right? But it's not like a computer. And I actually used to think this, right? So when I was first studying this stuff, I used to think subconscious instinct was actually an artificial intelligence that I had no control over. But then I learned that's actually not true. I am still thinking with it, right? So even after I hold an intention and my subconscious becomes quantized, right, and I enter a transcendental state of awareness, it's not just completely doing its own thing with me having no control. I'm actually thinking with it. It's only doing what I'm thinking on a subconscious level. It's just it seems almost like it's doing it automatically because I'm used to the control of the conscious mind. So I'm using the conscious mind as a reference point of thought. But the subconscious, again, is different. So what I eventually learned was that I was thinking, like I said, with two minds. So on the conscious level, I'm thinking with my free will in the conscious mind. But when it comes to subconscious thought, I'm thinking on the level of instinct or subconscious instinct. And that can almost feel very much like an artificial intelligence I have no control over, but that's not true. It's just the control is different. And that's what I said in the first chapter. The control paradigm is different. So it follows a quantization paradigm, right? So you have to really, so it's important to practice this. So if you keep practicing entering a transcendental state of awareness, and then you keep practicing using charging emotion and imagining things with your subconscious, you're going to get used to thinking with your instinct or thinking with your subconscious instinct, right? And it's a very tricky thing to explain. And yeah, that's actually what I talk about here. To control the subconscious properly, one must learn to recognize the difference between thinking with the conscious mind and thinking with subconscious instinct. So it's very tricky. It's a very hard thing to explain. It's hard for me to explain in the book too. The best way I can kind of do it, and I think I said this in the book too, is when you enter a transcendental state and you enter a daydream and you just start thinking random things, try to control your thoughts in that state. So what you feel and what you're imagining, try to control them without using your intention, right? And you're going to notice, which you're always going to think. Like I said before, you can't turn your conscious mind off. So you have to use intention either way. But just try anyway. Try to think without using intention. And you're going to notice that it's like you're relying on a sort of part of your mind that seems more subterranean, right? So it seems more, it just seems different from the conscious mind. And what you're going to notice is that what you're relying on to kind of do things is your subconscious instinct. So you just do it, right? I like to actually think, I forgot to mention this, when I control my instinct, right, it actually feels very similar to the part of my mind that I'm using to control my body, right? So for example, if you try to control your arm using the same type of conscious-minded thought that you use to, I don't know, imagine, let's say you want to imagine moving your arm, right? Clearly, that's a different type of thought than the one that you actually use to move your arm, right? If I imagine moving my arm, it'll never move in a million years, right? I have to use this very special type of thought in my mind to move my arm, and only then does it move, right? Moving my arm is not, the same thought I use to move my arm is not going to be the thought that allows me to imagine moving my arm, right? So there are different types of thoughts in your mind, or different expressions of thought, right? Just putting it in a more general way, right? So the subconscious instinct is the same way. If you think, when I was sort of learning all of this, when I started getting used to controlling my subconscious instinct, it kind of felt like the same part of my mind I used to move my body, that's the part I'm really using to control instinct, right? Which kind of makes sense based on everything we've been saying, because subconscious instinct is actually responsible, or subconscious transcendental control is used to move your body. And when you're in your ground state, the subconscious action is still expresses itself as a form of control. We just call it normal control, right? But that same part of your mind, it can express itself as a form of control, but it can also express itself as imagination, it can express itself as creativity, it can express itself as belief. So that's kind of how it felt to me. But yeah, I want you guys to just practice it. So hold an intention for 7 to 10 seconds, and then when you find yourself entering a daydream, right, go acquiesce to the feeling and allow yourself to just wander off into a daydream. And what you're going to notice is that, and I should mention, I think I talk about this a little later, but I'll just say it anyway. When you wander off in a daydream, you're going to find that you forget about, a lot of what you were thinking before you entered the transcendental state, because your subconscious is going to compel you to just think random things and go into a daydream. So that's part of the acquiescence process. But when you acquiesce and you enter the daydream, try not to think and control the dream using your conscious mind or the conscious thoughts the way you normally would. Try to think using the part of your mind that's called, I'm calling instinct, right? And you're going to notice that everything you're doing to control the daydream, you're just doing it, right? You're not thinking about it. You're not thinking about it in a premeditated way. You're not planning it. You're just doing it, right? The same way you just produce emotion. And even during the daydream, you're going to have an enhanced ability to produce emotion because you're in a transcendental state. So the same part of your mind that you're using to produce emotion, you're going to notice that you're just doing it, right? You're just producing emotion. Try to use that same part of your mind to sort of just imagine things or just control the dream, right? And you're going to notice that as you keep practicing that, you're going to get used to recognizing exactly what this says. You're going to get used to recognizing the part of your mind that I'm calling subconscious instinct. And you're going to learn to recognize the difference between the way that how you express thought at that level of awareness versus how you express thought at the conscious-minded level of awareness. And as you get better and better at that, you're going to start to get better at controlling your subconscious mind. So learning to control your instinct is what it means to control your subconscious mind. And just to kind of bring things home a little bit, so throughout the book, the curriculum, when we've been using the term positive mind, what we're actually referring to is your subconscious instinct, or thinking with your positive mind. It refers to thinking with your subconscious instinct. So going forward, I may use the terms interchangeably, positive mind or subconscious instinct, or just instinct in general. They're pretty much all the same. So even as an example, when you're charging your subconscious for creativity, for example, right? You can charge your subconscious in such a way where you're creating at a level of instinct. So you're just doing it, right? So when you're in the zone, right, in like funny thoughts or funny jokes just come rushing into your mind without you really even trying, that's because your instinct has been charged, right, to start thinking it starts thinking for the purpose of creating jokes. So your subconscious instinct is extremely creative, it's extremely intelligent, it just doesn't have control and free will like the conscious mind has. So when you charge your subconscious, you're charging it in such a way that your subconscious instinct starts to think certain things and do certain things. So it can think in extremely complex ways and according to extremely complex patterns if you charge it to do that. Otherwise, it's going to be very simple and it's probably not going to think in a logically coherent way. But when you charge it for creativity, then your subconscious instinct starts to think in a very organized and very complex way. And again, we'll talk more about that in chapter 13 when we talk about subconscious organization. That's actually what I'm referring to. But so you can, when your subconscious instinct starts trying to create things, it can do it in very complex ways. But creates the creativity or transcendental creativity that I've been talking about is occurring on the level of instinct, right? Same thing with mathematics or intelligence. When you charge your subconscious in such a way, you can use it for to solve complex problems, right? And that's also coming from your instinct. So your instinct can perform extremely complex calculations if you charge it to do that. So I think that's pretty much it for this video. Again, just keep practicing that, because now we're pretty much getting close to chapter 11 when I actually start talking about how to charge the subconscious. So you want to practice this to get used to it. Like I said, you can hold an intention to feel some emotion, let's say inner peace. Charge it to feel inner peace. Hold the intention to feel inner peace for 7 to 10 seconds. When you enter a transcendental state, try not to use your conscious mind to just will yourself to feel more of peace. Try to now look for the part of awareness where you're kind of just doing things instantaneously, right? So as you enter a transcendental state from holding that intention, you are going to feel inner peace more strongly when you enter that transcendental state. But the part of your mind that you feel like is producing the actual emotion, try to hone in on that part of your mind, which is going to be your instinct, and try to start controlling things using your instinct. It's going to feel like, I almost give it like a kind of a circular feeling. What I mean by that is the conscious mind, if I had to describe controlling it, it's like it can move in right angles, right? So everything is very quick, direct. It can accelerate in different directions very easily. The subconscious instinct doesn't do that. It's like when I want to think something with subconscious instinct, I only do it slowly. So it's like it moves in curves. That's the best way I can describe it. It's like, let's say I'm imagining myself running down the street in a transcendental state. So my subconscious instinct is expressing the action of the imagination of running down the street. If I want to imagine, let's say myself sitting in a restaurant after that. It's like I can't just cut to a restaurant scene instantaneously. My conscious mind can, but subconscious instinct, it just doesn't do that, right? So if I'm imagining that, it's like I have to try to slowly change my subconscious instinct into thinking about myself now in a restaurant. So it happens very slowly. It's like it thinks in curves. It doesn't think in right angles like the conscious mind. So you'll probably understand what I'm saying once you get used to practicing this, right? And I think that has to do just with the energy nature and energy component of subconscious thought, right? If that energy to think, imagining down the street, walking down the street is there, then it takes a little while to change into thinking about myself in a restaurant, because it's kind of a very different expression of thought, and the energy of myself walking down the street is still there, hasn't dissipated or changed itself yet, changed into a new form. So yeah, that's it. I think in the next section of this chapter, we're now going to talk about how the subconscious charges, right? So that'll even give you a better sense of what to do to practice charging your subconscious before we get to chapter 11, which I recommend to practice now, get used to it. And in chapter 11, we're going to go into a little more detail about how about the techniques you would use to charge the subconscious. So yeah, that's it for now, but thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.